Democracy, if not executed properly, is nothing but a corrupt system where the government is left unchecked and the people's voices unheard of. A world where coalition politics does not cease to exist is a world where there is no check and balance whatsoever, and a government that is synonymous to an authoritarian one. Three things to note just on the kind of our model. Firstly, how do we define coalition politics? We think that in the vast majority of instances, it is an arrangement in which multiple political parties come together to reach a certain goal, i.e. winning an election. This typically happens in democratic countries with a multi-party system like Indonesia, and it looks like PDIP merging with Nasdem, Hanura, etc. for Jokowi and Maruf Amin during the last election. Secondly, how do we envision the world without coalition politics? We think that firstly, it's going to be a world where each party stands for their own and can act independently to run for an election, for instance. Secondly, this does not mean that political parties can't agree to a certain opinion of other parties. They still can. The only difference is that they can sometimes support good decisions and call out bad ones, whereas a coalition would have no room for disagreement because they are now under the same umbrella. But thirdly, we think that different parties can now act out on their own without any complicated bureaucracies whatsoever because they don't represent an entire coalition made up of other political parties to begin with. Two arguments that I'm going to bring in the speech. Firstly, why coalition politics is principally abhorrent to begin with, and secondly, how this could make already large political parties even larger and why that's bad. First argument then. We think that political parties morally defy their duties when they go for a coalition. That is to say that the political parties whose jobs are to represent the voices of the people are now abandoning them. This is likely to happen for two different reasons. Because A, when the coalitions are made, they completely change their incentive into one particular goal only. Like winning the election, for instance, no matter what it takes. This often means that they're going to completely shift their agenda to cater to the wants of the majority votes. Like maintaining a good economy, for instance, instead of building infrastructure for rural areas, like what they promised before the election happened or before the coalition was formed to begin with. Or even worse, they might play dirty and do identity politics to cater to the majority, abandoning their promises before the coalition as a party of their own, and harming minorities, etc. But B, this is likely because the agendas of political parties will vary from one another, right? And it's really hard to have an arrangement and an agreement on the things that they should do as one particular coalition. The worst case scenario is that only the largest party in that coalition, like PDIP for instance, will be the one that's making all the decisions in that particular coalition. I think this is important to note for two different reasons. Because firstly, we pay taxes and political parties use those taxes to operate. So they're ultimately abandoning their moral obligation and social contract when they don't fulfill the needs of the people. But secondly, we think that it is just principally abhorrent for them to not only misrepresent the people, but also go back on their promises for selfish reasons such as winning the election. The comparative on our side of the house is twofold. First, after the election, the parties can act separately without representing a whole coalition, right? So they would focus on catering to specific needs of the people on the ground without complicated bureaucracies because they don't have to represent an entire coalition. But second, and more importantly, right, they don't betray the trust of the people whom they have moral duties to fulfill to, which is immoral under their side of the house. Second argument then. How this could make already large political parties even larger and why that's bad. I'd just like to highlight at the top of this argument that there is no opposition whatsoever under opposition's world. This looks a lot like status quo in Indonesia, right? Where the only opposition towards the Jokowi administration is literally PKS. And it is likely for other parties to just follow the already large parties like PDIP in future elections, for instance, for three different reasons. Firstly, is that smaller parties have no alternative but to do so if they want to get a chance to have power. This is because the larger parties have more leverage, right, as a whole, i.e. larger capital for campaigns, larger amount of members, etc. So they'll have the majority of like the control in the coalition to begin with. But secondly, joining these large parties and like large coalitions often come with like a lot of tempting rewards, like a vice presidential position for like one of the members of these smaller parties, for instance. And that's a huge tempting reward that they probably wouldn't have the option to refuse to in the first place. But thirdly, and even worse, is that because coalitions could still exist as a whole even after the election, the other larger parties like Gerindra, for instance, can also merge into the winning coalition, which is PDIP's coalition, for instance. And that creates even less of an opposition under their side of the house. This is important to note for 4 different reasons. A is that there is no check and balance whatsoever. That is to say that the coalition could just launch new policies that might not be good for the country, but no one can stop them anyways, because they can literally monopolize the entire country now. B is that having one political party like PKS, for instance, or calling out politicians on Twitter and social media, or on any media platform actually, won't work, because in politics, oftentimes you need a larger standing and a larger backing to oppose ideas. Hence, you also need more or larger political parties to check and balance effectively. C, there will just be multiple misrepresentations from like the people, from like these parties, from this coalition to begin with, right? Because there could be people rooting for the smaller parties instead, but it just so happens that they're now part of the larger coalition and that they have no other choice but to vote for this coalition. They want to support the smaller party that they have been supporting even before this coalition. But D, there is just going to be like a large misuse in capital, for instance, because these large political parties could already fund their own campaigns without this coalition to begin with. But because they now get more money from like other parties, they can now reach out to more people during campaigns and even monopolize the entire election, because they reach out to more people that otherwise wouldn't have done so if these parties are alone, for instance. The comparative you get on our side of the house is simple. Is that firstly, you get more political parties to check and balance, which means you'll get better policies and zero misrepresentation under our side of the house. But secondly, you get more options to choose from, because each political party stands for their own without necessarily representing other political parties. What we need out of an opposition are structural reasons why it is just for political parties to abandon their moral duty to begin with, and why having little to no opposition whatsoever in a democratic government is justified. Very proud to propose.